Even parchment crumbles. Extracts from the Perpetual Saga by Rod Summers.
We were talking about you. Say, I just don't care. I deny anything except perhaps feminist responsibility.
I could, were I so to wish, regroup time right here. There. With some history, it is possible to cite the beginning and from careful perusal of the surviving evidence to state a reason for the inauguration of the events. But here we are less clear about any of these things, and despite having had some time to settle, the view to this particular piece of the past remains murky at best. Reasons are appended to history during post-event documentation, and remaining vestiges of pre-event truth are often influenced or even eradicated by the contemporary fashion in political expediency. Love and the concept of peace are sometimes the trend, but never the norm. The days here described were barbaric. Axe and sword wielders high on a mushroom called the Berserk Maker proliferated in the Nordic lands. Bored insane from 4 months of sitting out the winter darkness, combined with a harsh life, fishing dangerous waters, and farming where even trees must conform to survive the persistently interesting weather, the sons of the settlers were looking for trouble with an enthusiasm equal to that which they applied to looking for precious metals, stones, and honey. Here, then, are the remaining fragments, particles of at least 3 stories spoken many times and once written down. I leave you to draw your own conclusions concerning the veracity of any reality suggested, and to build anomaly-spanning bridges according to the specifications of your own perception.
The end of winter always feels unpleasantly distended, because the middle weeks of March each have 2 extra Odin's days.
Away! You're obsessed with defining time, Bylethur. Take my word for it, mankind will never need anything more precise than the rising and the setting of the sun.
The Romans have retired. Who's this mankind you're talking about?
The opening element of the story was discovered on a partial, much deteriorated manuscript, itself supposed a copy of the original. I was given considerable help in the translation from the original Icelandic by my esteemed colleague, Professor Paul Hermansen, a fine fellow of the old school. All that remains of this untitled saga is the beginning of an apparently longer story, a story now lost to us forever. We are fortunate to have the composition of the raiding party described, and that gives us the connection to the events described in Orkney, but I get ahead of myself.
On the south coast of Iceland, the sands are black, and often subject to rearrangement from inclemency of weather or the anguish of the ocean. That and the naturally restless nature of rock and ice when united in a glacial-capped active volcano. Here, a little west of centre, there is a promontory where the great skewer plunders. Man has farmed this area for some 80 years since the hard-fought days of the first settlements. 3 young men take shelter in the cure house, whilst the wind bites with ice. If it's this bitter down here, think how it will be up there on the plateau. This cold will take a greedy portion of the new lambs, said Mauer, the youngest of the party. Well, why don't you go up there, Ulfr, and light a big fire for them, to keep them warm? And I'll come with you, Ulfr, and I shall be a big help, said the portly one of the 3, and made ready to leave immediately. Nobody's going anywhere, Arwyll, said Ulfr, and then, seeing that his words were wounding to his companion, he added, The storm will only last for the day, or 2 at the most. The strongest lambs will survive. Then he turned to Mauer and asked, Did you see Siver bring in the boat yet? No, the wind blows too thickly to see much further than you can throw a horse. I'll go and have a look and see if he's back. I thought I heard a keel on shingle, but I'm not sure. We'll all go, said Ulfr. Later that late spring day, when the tide crest had already fallen, Saevar and Ulfr stood before their father, after whom Ulfr was named, and they put their proposal before him. It was Ulfr who spoke, as Saevar rarely had much to say. Ulfr told his father that they had finished overseeing the seeding of the fields and had completed those other tasks expected of them for the season, and now, as they had time on their hands before harvest, they wished, with the company of their friend Helgi Gislisson, to take the family boat and go raiding to the south. Now it was often said of the father, Ulfr Egilson, who was known as Barking Uli in his Viking days, that he had let his sons run wild after the boy's mother, his wife, Anna Skalagra, had died in childbirth and taken his will and life-joy with her to the grave. But the truth was that he had done his best to bring up his children, and taught them well to survive the harshness of life on an island on the edge of the winter reaches of the infinite ice. He was not, therefore, inclined to refuse his eldest sons their request, for, apart from an unease within himself, he could think of no good reason to deny them. Pride pricked him when he thought that the family tradition was so eagerly undertaken by his own sons. He was not, however, at peace with the idea that their travelling companion should be Helgi Gislisson, for the man had a reputation for being too often close to trouble, or even, and on several occasions, the very cause of it. The father gave in to his son's hunger when they honestly promoted Helgi's good humour, battle experience, and knowledge of the ways of the northern waters. And so they set about preparing for the journey. Helgi was determined to teach his dog named Algebra how to properly bury a bone before he set off on the spring raid. The dog watched attentively as Helgi patiently demonstrated the technique 3 times over, but despite the one's application and the other's persistence, the dog was unable to master the rudiments in the use of the pickaxe and shovel. The gathered friends of Helgi for whom he was performing laughed until they were weak from it. Amongst those gathered there was a man named Adelreich, one of the sons of Brithorn of Hetla. Adelreich was born not well of mind and grew large and awkward. His brothers, Nolani and Weiralt, did their best to protect him from the worst of dangers, and his good humour helped him to recover quickly from most of the accidents that with an unkind regularity befell him. Also there, drunk in the midnight daylight, were the sons of Blue Sim Barthur and Sister his sister. Dagr Heimerson was there, and of course Helgi's future shipmates Ulfar and Saevar with their younger brother Maur. There were many fine young Icelanders there that day-night, who witnessed the moment when joy vanished like the northern lights to be replaced with the darkness of a starless winter night, a darkness that was to persist across many seasons. Helgi looked into the eyes of his dog and said, "A dog that's unable to bury his own bones stands but little chance of surviving the ages." The dog stared up in absolute faith and boundless devotion as Helgi composed this poem. You're a daft dog, yar, algebra, algebra. You're a daft dog, yar, algebra. Your trust is unbounded, your friendship unbarred. You're a daft dog, yar, algebra. Staggering forward, laughing and shouting, "Stupid bloody dog!" came Adelrake, and, before anyone could stop him, he lifted his hand axe and severed the dog's head with one stroke. Algebra's strong heart beat blood into its master's eyes, and desperate sorrow blinded Helgi further. Adelrike staggered back a pace or two, now suddenly sober and deeply shocked by what he had done. It was then, as Helgi knelt, incapacitated by grief, and Adelrike stood in no state to defend himself, that Mauer rushed forward in youthful fury and delivered such a blow that his sword blade broke as it severed the life cord of the unfortunate Adelrake. Nolandi and Weyrald drew weapons and prepared to kill their brother's killer, but the others who were there quickly came between them, and the bloodshed was stopped. It seemed then as though the whole population of Iceland held a collective breath, awaiting the cyclic eruption of feud and counter-feud, expecting sorrow and death to cast a bitter blight over all the doings of man, and, in society, hatred becoming an acceptable obsession. But these inevitabilities were postponed as Helgi and his friends sailed on the first tide following the incident, taking Mauer with them, as this seemed the only way to protect his life.
You might as well ask, why is gold colored gold? Or, why does quicksilver not stay in the one place, as does real silver? A lodestone shows the way north on starless nights, and when all other signs are obliterated by the scudding of clouds. It is not necessary to know how the stone knows its direction, we just take advantage of its properties.
But what if it goes wrong?
There's nothing to go wrong, and, if anything does, the gods will protect us.
Since when? I'd rather know what's behind the thunder.
We will make sure soon enough. Forget about mechanics. Get ready to go looking for loot.
The second connection is composed of extracts from several manuscripts and journals, the earliest of which can be dated to within 30 years of the events described. I acknowledge that some learned people express doubts over the relevance of some elements of this Orcadian adventure, but I believe I am justified in my synthesis, and that the links are quite obvious to the open mind.
Humanity will know how to wait until eternity for his evolutionary recht to self-responsible personal liberty. It may well take 9,000 generations, or perhaps an external threat, a devastating plague or baith and more, afore we are released from subjugation, and there is universal respect for the individual. Oppression will eventually be recognized as an untenable characteristic for the survival of the species, and the lust for power will be considered a serious disorder of thought. It will happen. For our money, he dreamed on it, for it to be excluded forever. We've had 1,000 years of formalized religion, and how far has it brought us? Our simplicity has manifest Almighty God as a human Son of God, allowing the clerics to have tied us down with chapter and verse. Few have felt the passion required by the profession. Few have felt the mystery of aware existence. Torn between turning the other cheek and girding myself with shield and sword, I stood by and watched raiders axe the life from my father's body as he knelt before the altar. I held myself silent and tried to become one with the shadows in our kirk. Neither sackcloth and ashes nor an acolyte's cassock are any substitute for body armour, and martyrdom only works for true believers. One of the white terrorists stared into the dark space where I trembled, whilst the other two examined the metal of the altar fittings. One used the back of his axe to flatten the chalice, whilst the other unscrewed the gold crucifix from the metal base before tossing the worthless part away. There being nothing else of value, and nothing to burn, the 3 adults, and a boy no older than myself, left after each had defecated in the centre of the aisle. But when 3 of the 4 perpetrators returned some months later, they were encumbered by a strange device which gave us the advantage. We attacked them with pike and stave and drove them to seek shelter in Orcahog. They dragged the device into the passage after them, until its many rare appendages became well and truly wedged against the walls, creating a most effective barrier against their escape, and between us and our revenge. For a long while, fear of the machine, and all its whirring and buzzing and lights inconstant but brighter even than stars, for stars cannot be seen in broad daylight, kept us at bay. We heard the clash of steel from within several times over the next few days, and thought they must be either practicing battle or trying to dig their way out through the top. Also, all Orcadians were beginning to notice a shaking had taken to the earth, and foulness could be tasted in the air, and that these manifestations seemed to emanate directly from Orcahog. There was a rapid increase in debilitating sicknesses, and the prices of certain herbs, known locally for their ability to purify, rose sharply. Eventually, a party of 3 brothers, including myself, crawled into the passage with ropes and attached them to those parts of the animated barricade which we could reach. When 9 or so ropes were attached, many pulled upon them, whilst others stood by with heavy nets to prevent the escape of the instigators of such havoc and grief. The machine came free quite easily, but despite its release it continued to be the source of unspeakable unpleasantness. When the sole-whole survivor came crawling from the passage, dragging a much injured colleague with him, we fell on them and held them to the ground whilst we removed their blood-stained weapons. They were much reduced by prolonged proximity to bad odours from the machine and hunger, for they had eaten nothing for days but the mushroom they had brought with them, and those others they found growing within the chamber. The madness brought on by this fungal diet, had caused the one to kill the older brother in order to save the life of the younger. Only the strongest of minds recover from such experience. It was obvious that in this state they posed no threat to us. We gave them a little food and water, and when they had regained what strength and sense seemed reasonably safe, we put them and the machine in a boat and sent them off with the final and solemn instruction that their return to Orkney would lead to their certain death at our collective hand. That was the gist of it. Aye. That is, more nor less, how I heard the story, direct frae the mouth of the priest's youngest son. Of course, he was an old man by the time we spoke, wounded by callous destiny. Still sad, still full of regret and resentment at emotional responsibility, and poetic justice, and hereditary instincts when applied to gene preservation. And it all ties in and adds up, you see. For I also had the good fortune to talk at length and many times over to Nan, the doctor of Omenan, hersel the doctor of Ernanan, last of the pure Picts. It was frae personal experience that Nan verified the whole incident and its consequences. She also told me o how, despite her pleadings to the leader of this, the last raiding party, they had stolen the holiest item of the Pictish heritage, and even how she herself had, albeit unwittingly, assisted the theft. For you must have heard that the chief responsibility of the Pictish womenfolk, locally kent as the mound minders over on Orkney, was to maintain the places where the Sky Tribe's belongings was stored, awaiting the eventual return of their rightful owners. Well, the most significant item in their care was a box which stood centrally on the flare of an intricately constructed square stone chamber, outside, turf-roofed in the round, which is there to this day and cried May's how. The chamber can only be entered by a long, low tunnel with walls of single, finely dressed granite slab. 3 weir side chambers can be accessed frae the main chamber, and there's much runic graffiti cut into the stone, adorning the walls of the main chamber. But on the ceiling of the central side, written in lamp oil suit, is this text. Fallowfield, in dateless state, wrote this. Nan told me that the had occupied the same place in the building, exactly as placed there by the Sky Tribe's leader, Fobrian, some 4,000 years before Nan became custodian. Nobody kent exactly what the box contained, for them whose curiosity had led them to open the box and look inside was unable to put words of description to what it was that they saw therein. And them wha opened the casket and touched the contents in an attempt to learn of its nature, or even attempted to reach out and touch them, died in a lashing fire that lasted but an instant, yet reduced the rash to a smouldering brittle ash in a flash. A sicht meer bricht than daylicht.
The rest of the text is infuriatingly indecipherable. So now, the last and perhaps most tenuous connection, which comes from the Lyndon Lee Annals. Please note the description of a machine which is strikingly similar to that given at the end of the previous barley extract.
Barley always grew well round here, and we got plenty of sheep and honey too. There's no shortage of bees or flowers for them to suck upon, and them's the things in it. Them's the things what brought the raiders here in the first place. That and the white cliffs we got down here. Right interested on our white cliffs they was. Seems they don't have anything like that where they come from. Most of their cliffs are black, it appears. Well, we didn't mind so much when they first came, 'cause most of the time they would attack the church and the priests first. So we had time to run off and hide in the woods and wait until they went away like. Then we'd come down and clear up and see if they'd left us anything. They really did. As the raids became more frequent, we began storing our supplies further and further from our dwellings, and we learned how to run real fast. The raiders took longer and longer to find what they had come for, until eventually they stayed over the winter, and Wessex was colonised by the Vikings, starting right here in Dorset. First they lived frugally, just robbing us for only what they needed, till we had nothing of value left. It was not a lot of fun for us peasants, twixt the Vikings on the shore and the barons on the hilltop. Well, eventually, of course, their own crops and sheep came on, and they took the pressure off of us. So some of us moved closer to take a look at them. For a long while, fear of the machine kept us at bay, with all its whirring and buzzing, and then constant lights brighter even than stars, for stars cannot be when 'tis day. Then one of our girls, Heather or Grace or Nancy, for the life of me I can no longer remember who was the first, went over to visit without her knickers on. And then their women started visiting us, bringing strong drink with them and being really friendly, and in no more than 3 seasons they changed from newcomers to neighbours. They certainly know their sheep, and their women are lovely. Tomorrow one of our girls shall wed the one that owned the strange box he brought from the north with him, and then sold it on to a visiting man named Sonny Boy Fuji for a very large amount of coin. I'll say this for them. Since they've been here, we've had plenty of traders passing through. I've sold sheep to every colour of man you could think of, and likely a few more besides, I should say. So I have quite a little pile of coin back home. Not much I can do with the stuff, of course, but it does come in handy for paying the protection tax the Vikings persist in collecting.
As Fjalli drew close to the shore at Viking Myrtles, he was greeted by the smell of puffin grilling on charcoal, and the cheering and shouts of welcome from the group of men gathered on the volatile border between lava, sand, and wave. He recognized friends and the estate by their gait. Beside him sat his new bride, now finely attired, as befits the wife of a very rich man.
the sun Drap Molten.
Marshall Anderson.
Da 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 da. The day I will weep for Scotland, while sleet is broadcast on an independent gale for Scandinavia. But there's little point in getting snared in yon old melancholia, so I will instead address my ain breezy thoughts to Edinburgh, Fife, and Maastricht. Twa ravens, black agin grey, harsh notes ringing off jagged crags, wheel abin me as I tear into a wind-bleached thicket with saw and muscle. The three o' us are the sole disruptors o' the peace this bleak day with Strabeg laid out, decaying, her alluvial soil gone sour as indifferent cheviots keep their heads down. There's weather here that's so insistent, so dramatic, and so forceful that you cannae ignore it. The day some vengeful, gale-maddened sprite is hosing down the windies wi' hail, sleet, and rain for byes, for good measure. And all the time our stoical, insistent sun, that daily grows in strength, nudges and barges through pressing crowds racing pell-mell fae the Atlantic in an oblivious, headlong charge to Orkney. The raw vitality of spring is wi' us noo, abrasive squalls carrying ice, nourish frail snowdrops, and propel sap with renewed vigour. The sun has attained a greater angle, lichting up Rigolta in late afternoon, detonating a charge in the sodden turf and pitting a skip in the Nanny's gate. The Gennard, freed frae its ice-bound tomb, surges with greater volume o'er cataracts, through defiles atween boulders, swelling lays and casting froth on salmon pools. Foinavan, unmoved, held pensive yet in winter's vice, refuses this whirligig and burlaboot on elfin air, ne'er at rest for a tryst. Snakes writhe across the sky, wriggle down Cranstacky's snow-caked buttresses, slither through courses atween knitted heather, fossil sphagnum, glacial lochans, brittle bracken, penetrating bane marrow, and shivers run through me, tickling frosty fingers that search out nerve endings, numbing 'em dead as ice on this St. Valentine's Day. Scythe banes cut clouds atwain, and a brash wind bends spears o' deer grass, while birch twigs rattle like sma' banes, as rantin' spring maks winter's skeleton dance to another tune. Twitterin' confetti blaws through the birks, gay notes gladden, as my spirit thaws and I feel my taes twitch. But 12:10, a grey shower smudges Cranstacky, as I shudder a heaving sack o' sawn wood hearthward. At 6 o'clock, gusts bluster forcefully about the bothy, finding chinks to wiggle through like spermatoza. Chappin', on the rattling windy, ye come like a spirit with a gale, to frighten me a wee bitty in the spooky, lonely blackness, bringing valentines and ushka beer. Lead grey Cranstacky, cold and dour, crushed my spirit as I climbed her splintery flanks. A small cairn marking a stalker's path provided licht relief as I readjusted stains, stacking them, maintaining tradition, giving purpose to my day and a reason for being sae exposed afore dropping down to the Bialach na Imrich and the kinder track to Strabeg. After a month of absence, we crashed in upon your silence, funding each stick and crock, seat and pot, just as we'd settled it, neat, to wait for the next incomer, little thinking it would be yourselves that would stour our ain dust o' memories. Now at 6 p.m. a snell blast reminds me of St. Valentine's Day, but the darkness and emptiness has flitted, leaving licht to accompany the silence, letting me see to cook o'er the embers, and save the store o' 9 candles to animate later shadows than then. For a second, the fish becomes a bird as it leaps frae the oily, peat-black flow and twists in the element o' air, its belly glinting silver afore crashing like Icarus. The land tastes different each time the river is run, and every joyous leap changes the memory of what once was. A fecund land, teeming wi' animal kind, wild and unpressurized by pylons, fences, roadsides, railways and machines. And in that second, while the fish-bird hangs in the firmament, free o' genetic responsibility, it views New Scotland poised, their destinies concurrent, a desperate flight of fancy, escaping fate and extinction. The land relaxed and a grippit tenseness left the grund, causing mares' tails to rin doon craggy features, swelling every trickle and cascade into a frenzied spate. Greyness blasted about the strath, hurling hither and thither, catched in contradictory eddies, and the Avane Polin, its muscles pumped up, bellowed atween its shanks, gone its gait terrible. Spring is a solemn affair, grey and sullen. Shards of blue and splinters of charcoal grind o'er Ben Spione, whilst an abrasive wind drives sleet and stinging rain. Sparks o' life determined to kindle this joyless landscape, as day by day the flames grow stranger, till you can feel the burning vigour, the bursting effervescence, the bludgeoning surge. Expansive verdant gestures sweep frae horizon to horizon, then peace. The land sighs, and ae trout rises for a mayflea. Even on a day in early summer sick as this, when the river smells of fish, the trees remain naked, skeletal, and rough brown merches are tufted wi' olive, a hudgie in my memory. Veins, in our early licht, purple and fu' o' purpose.
Saga af Fjalli.
Ásta Ólafsdóttir.
Saga af Fjalli. Komdu niður af fjallinu, hrópa ég upp til konunnar sem situr þar á steini klædd í skautbúning og er hætt að syngja. Í hvert sinn sem ég á leið undir fjallslíðina hrópa ég: Komdu niður af fjallinu. Eina svarið sem mér berst eru kvellir hljómar eins og þegar strekt band slæst í stöng í roki. Allir tala þetta. Það er talað mig og konuna sem er hætt að syngja en kemur samt ekki niður og flaggstöngina fánalausu. Hún situr uppi á fjallinu, jafnvel í þessari rigningu. Það hefur rignt í marga daga og ég hef ekki farið út því ég hef óbeit á vætunni. Í stað þess að ganga í fjallslíðinni hef ég ýmist gengið í íbúðinni eða staðið við eldhúsgluggann og reynt að aga vatnið í glasinu. Ekki skvettast svona út allt, hrópa ég til vatnsins. Í hvert sinn sem ég geng íbúðina með fullt vatnsglas hrópa ég skipandi: Ekki skvettast svona. Stundum skvettist vatn upp úr glasinu og stundum ekki. Ég vinn við það að horfa á annara líf. Helgar horfi ég á mitt eigið, sting höndum í vasan, hörfa aftur á bak svo ég standi ekki í vegi fyrir neinum og gæti þess að tönglast ekki alltaf á sömu setningunni. Fólk talar daginn út og daginn inn ástandið eins og það er og treystir því að Jónasi takist að hræra nokkur löng augnablik úr loftinu, fái hann rétta tegunda hrærivél. Hann beðinn að hræra saman nokkur smáatriði í löng augnablik sem verði að framtíð, harðri og þungri eins og Fjalli, en ekki léttri, mjúkri og titrandi eins og Royal vanillubúðing. Á meðan Jónas hringir í allar áttir til að spyrjast fyrir hrærivélar, ættu þið að brjóta saman nærfötin ykkar, raða eyðublöðunum á borðið og setja bréf í umslög. Eftir matinn þvoum við upp hnífapörin og horfum á ljós sem speglast í rigningapollunum á gangstéttinni fyrir framan fjallið. Hrein og nýpúsuð hnífapörin nota ég til þess að slá með þeim létt og taktfast á eldhúsborðið leið og hrærivelin hrærir augnablikin. Ég slæ taktinn til þess að regndroparnir falli ekki allir í einu niður, heldur blandist loftinu hæfilega svo úrverði notaleg framtíð í hrærivelina hjá Jónasi. Mér hlýtt til stjarnana og kalt til norðurljósanna. Hvísla ég upp í himinin án þess að hætta að slá taktinn. Öðru hvoru rek ég hendina út gluggan og læt nokkra dropa falla í lofa minn. Þeir eru langt að komnir, með því að skoða á þeim vængina má meta flugþól þeirra. Ég gæli við regndropana. Í þeim speglast fjarlægt framandi landslag og þangað mun ég ferðast þegar styttur upp og hún komin niður af fjallinu. Smám saman urðu droparnir minni og minni. Þá setti ég hnífapörin aftur í eldhússkúffuna og gekk inn í stofu til Jónasar og horfði með honum að hrærivelina þangað til rafmagni fór af og hrærivelin hætti að snúast. Þá snerum við okkur aftur á smáatriðunum. Eftir að hætta að rigna og ég hafði staðið hreyfingarlausu gluggan góða stund, aðeins hreyft fingurna ögn til þess að þeir stirðnuðu ekki að kulda, stóðst ég ekki mátið lengur og hrópaði upp til hennar. Sérðu hvað hálsinn á mér orðin langur af að mæna á því svona hátt uppi og svona langt í burtu? Hvað ertu að gera þarna uppi? Í dag átt þú að elda matinn ofan í okkur. Við viljum kjötsúpu. Snærið heldur áfram að slást í fánalausa flagstöngina og mér finnst að hún ætti ekki að sitja upp á þessu fjalli nú þegar veður gerast tvísýn, haustslátrun hafin og alla lengir eftir nýju lambakjöti. Ég sæki flíspeysu og góritexbuxur, úlpuna góðu og sitt hvað fleira og læt ofan í gamlan brúnan bakpoka. Geng svo af stað upp fjallið til þess að sækja hana. Þegar ég komin miðja leið upp hlíðina og stend á gilbarminum fyrir ofan fossinn, ljúkast himnarnir upp og gleypa fjallið í sig í einu munnbita, mig með og fjallkonuna á toppnum ásamt flaggstönginni fánalausu. Síðan ekki söguna meir fyrir nokkrum blaðsíðum seinna. Þess vegna þetta nú eins og það er. En lífið eins og ég hef alltaf sagt, afar einfalt og fjallar í stórum dráttum það að heilsa kurteislega þegar gengið inn. Sælt veri fólkið, þetta paradís? Nei, paradís ekki hér, paradís í bók. Þetta minnir mig nú samt á paradís. Manst þú mínar minningar í paradís? Ég á engar minningar því ég að bíða eftir því að þetta tímabil líði og næsta taki við. Og meðan ég bíð, tala ég það sem mér sýnist. Tala jafnvel steina. Sumir segja steinar séu steindauðir en fuglar setjast oft á steina. Áður fyrr var algengt að fólk settist á stein út í náttúrunni. Fólk sem það gerir fer nú fækkandi. Fleiri og fleiri setjast á stóla. Vertu svo vænn að máta þessa inniskó, það fyrsta sem sagt við þá sem koma til paradísar. Síðan masað og gengið marmaragólfin á köflóttum inniskóm. Allan liðlangan daginn rappar fólk saman eitt og annað, oftast á friðsaman hátt, en stundum slæri brínu á milli fólks. Æ, hvers vegna reytur hann með fingurna eins og væru þeir fiður? Eru þetta þakkirnar fyrir kanilsnúðana sem ég sendi þér? Hér er dagurinn svo stuttur að engir skuggar ná að festast. Dagurinn dugar lengur ef þú brýnir úrið þitt. Gluggar á húsum snúa inn en ekki út eins og flestir virðast halda. Allt snýr eitthvert, allt snýst þetta eitthvað. Allt sem sagt er bergmálar fagurlegar þegar himinin opnast aftur og gleypir í sig annað landslag og fleira fólk. Alltaf heilsum við kurteislega hinum nýkomnu. Annars staðar heldur tíminn áfram eða aftur á bak, eftir því hvernig vindar blása. Leitinni að upphafi sögunar er haldið áfram. Leiðarvísirinn er gömul og snjáð lókaritmatabla sem liggur frammi í afgreiðslunni. Þangað gengið til þess að spyrjast fyrir ferðir konuna af fjallinu og skoða matseðilinn. Þar sem áður hafði verið afgreiðslan stóð nú yfir uppgröftur og yfir honum stóðu margir þreknir karlmenn í sundskýlum með safarihatta á höfðinu. Hvað er í fréttum hjá ykkur fornleifafræðingum? Spurði Krómanjónmaðurinn. Ekkert, svaraði fornleifafræðingurinn og sparkaði kærureisislega í nokkra moldar hnullunga sem lágu á sléttum og velburstuðum uppgreftrinum. Til hvers er þetta tæki sem þú heldur á í höndunum? Hélt Krómanjónmaðurinn áfram að spyrja. Ég er búin að gleyma því til hvers þetta tæki er, sagði fornleifafræðingurinn og skoðaði lítið tæki sem hann hélt á í lófanum. Hann rétti það upp í átt til sólar, síðan að vinstra auga sín og skoðaði það vel. Ætli það sé ekki til þess að mæla eitthvað með, sagði hann svo. Þú býrð ekki svo vel að eiga aldursgreiningartæki, spurði þá Krómanjónmaðurinn. Nei, sagði fornleifafræðingurinn og horfði hugsi niður í moldina, en ég ágætt krem sem mýkir húðina svo að maður fá ekki djúpa hrukkur. Viltu dálítið af svoleiðis kremi? Ha, nei, ég á svoleiðis krem, sagði Krómanjónmaðurinn dálítið móðgaður, kvaddi og gekk sína leið. Hann fór á sinn stað í skáp númer 243 í náttúrufræðisafninu. Ég hef aldrei áður séð þig, sagði ung stúlka sem var að læra sagnfræði, vann sem fyrirsæti helgar og var þarna stödd ásamt myndatökuliði. Það er ekki von þú ert svo ung, svaraði Krómanjónmaðurinn og nuggaði sér augun. Hann var dálítið líkur neanderdalsmanninum þegar hann sagði þetta. Ertu blindur? Spurði stúlkan. Nei, svaraði Krómanjónmaðurinn, en stúlkan hét samt að veri blindur eins og ljóst er af uppsagnarbréfinu sem hún samdi eftir að hún hafði gefist upp á starfi sínu. Áður en hún braut bréfið saman og setti það í umslagið bætti hún við það neðst. P.S. Ykkur virðist í léttu rúmi liggja hvort ég brosi eða brosi ekki, hreyfi mig eða hreyfi mig ekki, hika eða hika ekki. Ykkur er sama hvort ég yfir höfuðið sést eða sést ekki og þess vegna hef ég nú ákveðið að helga líf mitt blindum mönnum. Jafnvel gömlum blindum mönnum, kannski frummönnum. Fjallið sem við höfum verið að tala var öðruvísi en önnur fjöll vegna þess að á toppi þess satt kona í skautbúning. Fjallið hét Vífilsfell og konan hét Hrund eða Hrönn, Þorradóttir eða Þorgrímsdóttir og var leikkona. Búningin fékk hún hjá saumakonunni í búningasafninu. Ég þurfti að næla upp faldinn með títiprjónum því átti engan tvinna og allar búðir voru lokaðar, en nóg að afgreiðslustúlkum í símaskráni, sagði saumakonan við manninn sem tók viðtalið við hana þessa atburði nokkrum árum seinna. Þá máttu afgreiðslustúlkur ekki afgreiða öðrum tímum en opnunartíma verslana, bætti hún við. Þau ræddu allt milli himins og jarðar, saumakonan og sá sem tók viðtalið. Hún heldur kannski að himinin skýl henni, sagði blaðamaðurinn sem vissi ekki að himinin hafði gleypt hana. Ekkert skýlir henni annað en búningurinn sem hún í og það löngu komin tími til þess að hún komi niður og blandi geði við fólk. Því þótt ekki séu margir á ferli má þó rekast á fólk í dyragættum heima á sér. Í dyragættinni hlær fólk saman. Sumir hlæja ofan í inniskóna sína, aðrir ofan í töskuna sína eða ofan í stígvélin sín. Sumir hlæja ofan í sultukrukkur og skrúfa svo lokið á. Þegar viðtalið birtist kom í ljós að það fjallaði hvorki fjallkonuna né saumakonuna, heldur fjallið Vífilsfell og hvar best væri að ganga upp á það. Við fjallsrætur stendur fararstjóri Ferðafélags Íslands og ætlar í fjallgöngu en finnur ekki fjallið. Á meðan hann lítur aftur fyrir sig og skimar eftir fjallinu, fellur það ofan af himnum beint fyrir framan hann aðeins breytt. Komin í það skörð og dalir þar sem fuglar himinsins hafa nartað í það. Ég stend enn í hlíðinni og Hrund eða Hrönn situr á steini á fjallstopnum í skautbúningnum snjáðum með kaffibolla í hendinni. Fuglar taka flugstökk í kringum fjallið. Fjallgöngumaðurinn meðlimur í FÍ kallar upp til hennar. Er eitthvað að sjá þarna uppi? Bara mig, svarar fjallkonan. Ég sit hérna á þessum steini og glugga í lógaritmatöflunum og drekk kaffið mitt sem reyndar að verða kalt. Ég reyna að átta mig á því hvað fyrir innan mig og hvað fyrir utan, svo ég geti orðað óskir mínar á sem nákvæmastan hátt. Sjáðu nú til. Nú fljúga 2 fuglar himinin. Annar flýgur fyrir utan mig, hinn inn í mér. Annar hverfur inn í skýin og sést aldrei meir. Hinn lækkar flugið og sest á gluggasillu baðherbyggisins inni í mér. Burt með þið fuglir í baði, kalla ég til hans. Síðan heyrist hrópað úr öðrum herbergjum. Klára ekki sjampóið mitt. Vektum eftir 2 tíma. Þetta fjölskyldan inn í mér, bara venjuleg fjölskylda sem ég að reyna að losa mig við. Ertu með áttavit á þér? Bætir hún við, hrópandi til fjallgöngumannsins og beygir sig fram yfir brúnina. Hrund eða Hrönn klárar að drekka kaffið úr bollanum, snýr honum 3 hringi rangsælis og 3 hringi réttsælis fyrir ofan höfuð sitt og horfir svo ofan í botn bollans. Þarna sé ég þau öll saman á gangi. Ég sé Jónas, fornleifafræðinginn, Cro-Magnon-manninn, sýningarstúlkuna og yfirsaumakonuna. Þau ganga út úr bollanum og halda áfram eftir vegi sem liggur í bugðum þétt skrifaða síðu. Þau ganga yfir á spássíuna. Fjallkonan rýkur á fætur, styttir sig og skvettist niður fjallslíðina eins og vatnið í glasinu mínu. Hún hleypur á eftir Cro-Magnon-manninum sem hefur dregist ögn aftur úr. Hún rópar til hans. Bíddu eftir mér, ég ætla með þér. Þegar hann heyrir köll hennar, nemur hann snögglega staðar, snýr sér við og rópar á móti. Láttu þér ekki detta það í hug, barn. Þú átt ekkert erindi þangað sem við erum að fara.
She stands, letting the morn breathe on her, reading the hills and sky, interpreting weather codes and planning our day accordingly. Your wee red van dirled down the road in a blaze of sunlight at 1:45, so attain your absence for a walk to the macher. A dead fox, a lone curlew its mournful notes carrying across the kyle, a honfey o' white rabbit banes, a cold, dry nor'easterly. Hame, and I poo your living room about me like a plaid. You're ill-fated, you say, each time you fire your kiln the weather's fine, and as the volcano grows, you're duty-bound to nurture it, turning a blund to sun, mountains and creative walks. I say I'm just as ill-fated, for each time I think on Strabeg, assemble chattels in readiness and start to pack my rucksack, a fresh Atlantic low or Arctic front extinguishes the sun as I walk resigned towards the bothy, pushing creative expectations aside with a door. There can only be one solution to baith these cursed fates. We maun combine ill lucks, thwart our tormentors, no beguile nor trickery, pre-planning nor consultation. Nae sophistry is needed, simply tell me when the kiln is packed, for I will set aside all else and tack familiar tracks with sureness. Radio Scotland's newstime Freudian slip would no hae escaped your keen wit and wicked eye for detail when they mentioned your funeral the day, alongside a report on beached sperm whales at Cruden Bay and the council's concern o' who to dispose of the carcasses. You want to be free, you say, but are you prepared to pay the price of liberty? If so, get up now without delay. Push open this door. Anybody may enter. Take off your uniformity and lie naked on the floor. Each day you will cleanse yourself by carrying water frae the burn and fund heat in the labour of bringing wood to the hearth for cutting. Nourishment and life here is simple, uncomplicated, stress-free contentment. Now that you're settled in, acclimatised, tear up all notions of worldly success. There are nae laurels, medals, nor certificates for this freedom. Here you're forgotten, and in turn you will forget. Dinna regret the road you take, but bear in mind that it may lead back if you're prepared to pay the price of conformity. They said you had new come back for Australia, and that you were a solitary bird with a quiet sense of humour, suited to working with sheep. Naebody kent what was on your mind the day you walked with silent deliberation to thon place by the jetty, where you kent your best friend would fund you. Naebody heard thon single shot. Now a small wooden peg marks your place in the graveyard by the sea, the next in line waiting for a headstone. For you, nae shallow pit unmarked aside a lonely crossroads. Here, in a wide, deep, glaciated corrie, held prisoner by ice-hound, snow-white blades, flashing again pure azure, you can hear the scattered boulders grumbling, their timeless conversations carry fae Lochan Uain Earshin. On a froze breeze that lifts off Lochan Tua and touches your skin-numbing ganglia as it passes, ensuring that pools and rivulets, pellucid trickles and silent burns are locked up ticht afore escaping our saline Lochan shard in ain joyous liberated bound towards the Hebrides. Ye sit, unable to move, watching poised boulders, trying to catch ye in unawares. Pass